Hello, my name's Kate. I'm 62 years old, and I want to share a story that changed my life forever. My son banished me from everyone else and made me sit alone with my dog, Toby, as if I didn't belong at my own husband's funeral. While the guests exchanged polite, hollow condolences and avoided looking in my direction, Toby stayed pressed to my side, loyal as ever, his small presence giving me comfort I couldn't find anywhere else. I felt a mix of sorrow, confusion, and anger swirling inside me, my heart breaking not just for my husband, but for the betrayal of my own child. And then, as if the universe had something strange and unexpected in store, a man I had never seen before approached me with an unsettling calm and simply said, "Act like your dog." That moment felt like a key turning in a lock I didn't even know existed. Who was this man, and why would he say such a thing at such a time? It sparked a fire in me, a mixture of curiosity and cautious hope, and I realized that maybe, just maybe, this was the start of a path I needed to follow, one that would uncover secrets I never imagined. But before we go any further, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and write in the comments where you're watching from. I love reading the comments and knowing where you are. Now let's understand how this story really began. I stood on the front porch of the house that had been the center of my life for the past 30 years. The same house that Henry and I had built together, every brick laid with hope, every window framed with memories. Today, however, it felt like a cage rather than a home. My son had banished me to a solitary corner, an unwelcome shadow at my own husband's funeral, and the air around me buzzed with polite indifference and whispered condolences that never met my eyes. Guests moved as if through a fog, nodding gently, their eyes darting away, avoiding the raw truth of my presence. Yet beside me, as if he understood the weight pressing on my heart, Toby pressed close. His little body, warm and steady, a silent anchor amidst the chaos, reminded me that I was not entirely alone. Then he came. A man I had never seen before, with a calmness that unsettled me more than any shout or accusation could. He approached slowly, his gaze fixed on me with a piercing clarity that made me instinctively recoil, though my posture remained polite. "Act like your dog," he said simply. A sentence that made my skin prickle and my heart stumble in confusion. The words felt absurd, almost mocking, but there was an unmistakable edge to his voice, a weight that made me question why they were being spoken at this moment. I felt irritation flare within me, hot and sudden. I have always been the kind of woman who offers casseroles to grieving neighbors, who forgives petty rudeness with a smile and a quiet sigh. I have brushed off slights, covered for mistakes, and tried endlessly to maintain harmony. Yet here, at the most sacred and painful moment of my life, his words felt like a cruel jest. My chest tightened, the air heavy and unrelenting, and I caught Toby shifting restlessly at my feet. He scratched lightly at the patio door, eyes gleaming with urgency, as if sensing a path that I could not yet see. The funeral was suffocating, and I knew instinctively that I could not remain tethered to this place of hollow grief and false politeness. Toby's insistence was impossible to ignore. I followed him through the garden, past the familiar flower beds that Henry had loved, past the roses that I had nurtured alongside him, their petals now drooping under the weight of sorrow. Toby did not veer toward the grass or the open expanse of the yard. Instead, he made a beeline for the old oak tree, its roots gnarled and twisting like veins across the earth, and began barking with a fervor that made my heart leap. There, half buried under the roots, was a rusted trunk, locked and mysterious. My fingers tingled at the memory of Henry's words, spoken casually years ago, insisting it was empty. But the urgency in Toby's bark told me otherwise. Before I could gather my thoughts, the stranger appeared behind me, carrying a shovel that looked oddly familiar in its weight and purpose. We dug with deliberate care, the soil cool and heavy between my fingers, until the trunk was free enough to lift its lid. My heart thumped, a wild drumbeat of fear, curiosity, and disbelief. "Henry told me you have a good heart, Kate," the man said, his voice soft but unwavering. "But he knew your son has a greedy one. He told me to give you the key only when the dog pointed the way." My hands shook as they touched the cold metal key, and my mind raced to connect the threads of memory. The man Sterling, I realized with a shock that made my knees weak, was the lawyer Henry had been forced to fire years ago. A man disgraced by false accusations, yet quietly retained for reasons I had never known. Sterling's gaze softened, just enough to reveal trust and something that resembled hope. My pulse pounded as I looked from the key to Toby, who sat watching me with unwavering loyalty, his small tail wagging hesitantly, as if to encourage me. The weight of the moment pressed down, a mix of grief for Henry, confusion at Sterling's presence, and an unexpected surge of power that made my chest ache. I had been living in a lie, and yet, for the first time since Henry's passing, the lie seemed manageable, something I could unravel with careful hands and steady heart. I took the key and traced its cold edges, feeling Henry's foresight in every groove, every indentation. I realized then that the years of my quiet life, the forgiving nature, the patience and kindness I had cultivated, were all part of a plan I had never understood. The truth was finally within reach, guided by the one creature who had never abandoned me, and the man my husband had trusted beyond reason. Toby's warm presence, the weight of the key in my hand, and the whisper of Sterling's instructions combined into a symphony of purpose. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of clarity, a spark of the fire Henry had always known burned within me. I was no longer just the bereaved widow, delicate and overlooked. I was a woman on the brink of uncovering the long-hidden truth, and Toby, my steadfast companion, had led me to the threshold. I carefully lifted the lid of the trunk, my fingers trembling as if the weight of the past decades pressed down on them. The stranger, Mr. Sterling, stood silently behind me, his presence calm yet vigilant, a steady reminder that I was not alone in this strange and sudden quest for truth. Inside, my eyes fell not upon treasures or glittering gold, but upon a stack of ledgers, their leather covers worn and cracked with age, and a tablet device, sleek and impersonal in its modernity. My breath caught in my throat, a sharp, uneven rhythm as I reached in to touch the first ledger, the leather cool beneath my fingertips. I had always believed that family came first. That loyalty, even when tested, was the bond that carried us through hardship. And yet, as I opened the first page and began to read, a cold, paralyzing wave of betrayal washed over me. Jason, my son, had been siphoning money from Henry's carefully built retirement accounts for the past 5 years. Every entry, every transaction bore my forged signature, a mockery of my trust, a violation I had never imagined possible. I had forgiven his gambling before, countless times, believing that love and guidance could temper his recklessness. But this was deliberate, calculated, heartless. I closed my eyes for a moment, the sting of tears pricking the corners. "Why didn't Henry tell me?" I asked, my voice shaking, fragile yet cracking with suppressed anger. Sterling's gaze met mine, steady and unwavering, and in his eyes I saw the quiet weight of secrets kept and burdens carried. "Because you would have forgiven Jason again," he said softly, almost as if speaking to the hurt little girl I used to be. "Henry needed you to be angry enough to survive what comes next." The words landed like stones in my chest, and I felt the knot of grief twist into something sharper, something resolute. Toby, my loyal little Shih Tzu, growled low in his throat, his hackles rising slightly as his eyes flicked toward the house. My chest tightened further when I followed his gaze. There, on the porch, Jason stood with a glass of wine raised slightly in mock sophistication, as if he were the lord of the manor surveying his conquered estate. The sight of him, so casual, so indifferent to the devastation he had caused, made bile rise in my throat. For a moment, I felt the familiar stab of helplessness, the old, aching sorrow of a woman who had trusted too much. But it was fleeting. The anger, tempered with clarity, began to crystallize. I was not merely a grieving widow anymore. I was a woman betrayed, a woman whose own child had stolen her dignity and her inheritance. I wiped my tears hastily, taking care not to smudge the soft pages of the ledger. The sadness in my chest hardened into a cold, precise determination, like steel forming in a forge. I tucked the ledger into the oversized cardigan I always wore for comfort, feeling the weight of its truth press close to my heart. It was no longer just paper. It was a weapon, a revelation, a key to reclaiming what was rightfully mine. Every line of accounting, every forged signature, every note of deceit became a tangible piece of justice I could wield. "Mom, the guests are leaving." "You should probably head to the guest room," Jason's voice called out, sharp and almost taunting, carrying across the lawn like a knife through calm air. "Brenda and I are taking the master suite tonight." The words landed with an almost comical audacity, but beneath the absurdity simmered a venomous intent. He thought he could push me aside, diminish me, reduce my place in the home my husband and I had shared for decades to a mere inconvenience. He thought he could threaten Toby and my heart without consequence. I felt Toby brush against my legs, a warm, reassuring presence. The little dog had been my constant companion through joy and grief, and now he was a silent partner in this awakening. I leaned down, stroking his head lightly, feeling the trust and loyalty radiating from him. "We're not finished yet," I whispered, more to myself than to him, a promise to the small, brave creature at my side. The anger in my chest burned brighter now, a controlled fire illuminating the path forward. Sterling's presence behind me was quiet, unassuming, but I could feel the strength of his watchful eyes, the shared understanding that this was only the beginning. He had stood by Henry for years, a silent guardian, and now he was entrusted with me, with my protection, and with the unfolding of a plan I had only just begun to comprehend. The world outside, the house, the guests, Jason's smug expression, felt like a stage, a tableau of lies and false pride, and I was ready to step into my role, not as the defeated widow, but as a woman poised to reclaim her dignity. As I tucked the ledger safely away, I felt a flicker of hope, fragile yet persistent, like the first light of dawn peeking through a darkened window. The betrayal cut deep, yes, but it had not destroyed me. It had awakened a part of myself I had almost forgotten, the part that could endure, that could fight, that could rise. And as Toby settled back at my feet, eyes bright with understanding and unwavering loyalty, I knew that the journey ahead would demand patience, courage, and cunning. But I was no longer afraid. Not of Jason, not of the lies, not of the world that had once seemed so safe and so suddenly treacherous. For the first time since Henry had passed, I felt a strange clarity. This was not the end of our story. It was the beginning of my own reclamation, a path marked by sorrow, yes, but also by purpose, by justice, and by the unwavering bond of a little dog who had shown me the way. Toby's gaze met mine, and in it I saw reflection, not just of a loyal pet, but of a companion, a guide, and a reminder that love, even when tested by betrayal, could illuminate the darkest of truths. The audacity of my son struck me like a physical blow. I stood on the lawn of the house that had been the center of my life for 3 decades, each corner imbued with memories of laughter, quiet mornings, and the steady rhythm of ordinary life that Henry and I had built together. Every flower bed I had tended, every paint stroke I had chosen, every small comfort I had arranged for the family felt violated in a single, cold sweep. And there he stood, Jason, my own flesh and blood, proclaiming with his casual cruelty that I had no place in the house I had called home for so long. He was relegating me, the woman who had carried this home in her hands for 30 years, to a guest room, a temporary inconvenience to be tolerated until he and his wife could resume their life of entitlement. The betrayal cut sharper than I had expected. I walked through the front door, Toby trotting confidently at my heels. The small sound of his paws against the hardwood grounding me in a strange, steady rhythm. The familiar scent of the house, usually comforting, was now tainted by an undercurrent of defiance and disdain. Every step I took seemed to echo through the empty halls, reminders of a life that felt suddenly alien. I approached Jason, trying to appeal to the remnants of conscience I had once hoped he possessed. "Jason, this is my home. Your father's body isn't even cold," I said, my voice trembling but carrying the weight of authority, of maternal rights, of years of love that had shaped this house into a sanctuary. He laughed then, a sound that cut deep, cruel, and hollow, bouncing off the walls like a mocking echo. "Actually, Mom," he said with an unsettling calm, "Dad signed the deed over to me last month. You have 24 hours to pack. Brenda doesn't like dogs, so the rat needs to go to the pound immediately." I froze, a sharp pang of disbelief and outrage striking through my chest. The words pierced deeper than the financial betrayal, deeper than any insult could, for in that instant, Jason had not only stolen from me, but had threatened the one creature who had never abandoned me. Toby, my small loyal companion, looked up at me with wide, innocent eyes, unaware of the cruel calculus being played with his life. A strange calmness washed over me. I expected anger to roar, for tears to spill, for my voice to crack under the weight of outrage. But instead, something different happened. The part of me that Henry had nurtured, that had survived loss and hardship, surfaced. I did not scream. I did not beg. I straightened my back, feeling the bones in my spine align with purpose and resolve. "I see. If that is how it is," I said, my voice low but firm, "I will leave. But remember, Jason, you wanted to be the man of the house." The words felt like steel leaving my mouth. A quiet defiance that neither shouted nor demanded, but simply declared a truth he could not ignore. I packed a single bag, careful not to linger, careful not to give him the satisfaction of seeing me falter. Toby nestled into the folds of my cardigan as I lifted him, his tiny body warm and reassuring against my chest. We walked past Jason and Brenda without a word. His face contorted in confusion, his mouth opening slightly as if to call me back, to demand explanation, to exert some imagined power over me. But I did not turn, I did not break. The strength I had not known I still possessed surged through me in quiet waves, like water eroding the edges of fear until only clarity remained. Outside, I felt the crisp air fill my lungs, mingling with the sting of tears that had yet to fall and the strange, resolute calm that had settled over me. My old sedan waited, familiar yet insignificant in the face of the revelation I was about to uncover. I placed Toby safely in the passenger seat, his small eyes watching me with a trust that felt sacred, a bond I could not betray. I reached for the tablet from the trunk, the weight of it both a comfort and a promise, and turned it on. The screen prompted for a password, a gatekeeper to knowledge I had only just begun to grasp. I typed in the only thing that made sense, the date we had brought Toby home. The moment I pressed the final digit, the screen flickered and unlocked, revealing a single video file with a title that made my pulse quicken: The Scorched Earth Protocol. I stared at it, Toby's small head resting lightly against my arm, sensing the gravity in the silence. His tiny body a steady presence that anchored me in the swirling storm of fear, betrayal, and hope. A deep exhale left my lips, the first I had allowed myself since the revelation of Jason's treachery. The betrayal was real, the threat undeniable, but so was the path forward. Henry had left me a guide, a strategy, a way to reclaim not just what was stolen, but my dignity, my autonomy, and my right to protect those I loved. I pressed play on the video and Henry's face appeared. Frail, yet unmistakably resolute. his voice carrying the calm authority of a man who had seen every twist of human weakness and prepared for it in secret. I felt a surge of purpose unlike anything I had known in years. The world outside, Jason's smugness, his sense of entitlement, the small cruelties of the guests still departing, faded into the background. Here in the car with Toby, with Henry's voice guiding me through the shadows of deceit, I was no longer merely a victim. I was a woman armed with knowledge, bolstered by loyalty, and poised to reclaim what was rightfully mine. Toby licked my hand lightly, a small gesture of comfort, and I knew we were ready. Ready to step into the storm. Ready to face the sun who had tried to diminish me. Ready to fight, not with anger alone, but with the precision, patience, and courage that years of quiet resilience had instilled in me. The sun dipped lower behind the horizon, casting long shadows across the driveway as I settled into the driver's seat. Toby curled into my lap, the tablet resting against my leg, and for the first time since the funeral, I felt the beginnings of clarity. The journey ahead would demand all of my strength, every ounce of cunning, and a heart unyielding in its pursuit of justice. And yet, as I glanced at Toby, his small head lifting to meet mine, I understood something essential. Loyalty, love, and courage are rarely loud or dramatic. Sometimes they are quiet, patient, and unwavering, guiding you to act when the world expects you to falter. And I would not falter. Not now. Not ever. I pulled the car into the parking lot of a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, the kind with flickering neon lights and cracked pavement that spoke of years of wear and neglect. The air smelled faintly of stale smoke and disinfectant, a combination that usually repelled me, but tonight it was a sanctuary. Toby leapt from the passenger seat before I could even open the door, his little paws skittering across the rough asphalt, eager and undaunted by the unfamiliar surroundings. Inside the motel room, the smell of smoke was stronger, and the carpet was thin and worn, yet Toby curled up on the bed as if he had never been happier. And in his contentment, I found a strange comfort. There was no judgment here, no glances of pity or suspicion, just the steady rhythm of a loyal companion breathing beside me. I sank into the threadbare armchair with the tablet resting on my lap. The weight of the device felt heavy yet purposeful, like a key that could unlock everything Henry had kept hidden. I pressed play, and Henry's face filled the screen. He looked frail, his cheeks sunken and his eyes lined with fatigue. Yet there was a fire in them that made my chest ache. His voice, though weak, carried the authority I had loved and trusted all my life. "Kate, if you're watching this," he began, "Jason has taken the house. But he doesn't know about the shell company." I leaned forward, Toby's small head resting lightly against my knee, listening as if he understood the gravity of every word. The memory of Sterling's cryptic advice returned to me. Act like your dog. At first, it had seemed absurd, almost ridiculous. How could one take inspiration from a pet, a small creature with no understanding of complex human deceit? But now, as I watched Henry speak with such careful precision, the meaning became clear. Dogs are territorial. They are patient, observing everything around them, digging persistently until they find the object of their attention. Toby had pointed me to the trunk. Sterling had reinforced the lesson, and now I understood. I was to become a dog in human form, observant, cautious, and relentless in pursuit of what was rightfully mine. The next 3 days passed in a blur of transformation. I abandoned the persona I had worn comfortably for so long, the nice old lady who baked cookies for neighbors, smiled at clerks, forgave minor slights with a nod. That woman was gentle, forgiving, accommodating, and I had learned over decades that kindness could be exploited. Now, kindness had to take a back seat to strategy. I became a researcher, a detective of my own life, combing through every document, ledger, and note that had been buried in that rusted trunk beneath the oak tree. Toby never left my side. He would sit quietly on the rug beside the table where the papers were spread, occasionally nudging a ledger with his tiny nose, a reminder of loyalty and focus, and a silent encouragement that I was not alone in this pursuit. At the library, I pored over public records, cross-referencing information with the ledgers, scrutinizing dates, signatures, and property filings. Each discovery peeled back the layers of deception Jason had built around himself. The deed he had presented, the one that had forced me out of my own home, was a forgery. The signature was invalid, dated during the time Henry had been incapacitated, unable to consent to anything. Every page I examined was a revelation, a confirmation that the man I had raised as my son had not only stolen from me, but had woven an elaborate web of lies to secure his imagined dominion. Then there was the bigger revelation, one that made my pulse race and my chest swell with something like righteous pride. The entire property, the house, the land, the assets Jason believed he had taken, was owned not by him, nor by any casual will, but by a separate entity. Toby's Trust, LLC. Established years ago by Henry in my name. A shell company, yes, but one designed to protect me, to protect our legacy, and to ensure that even in his absence, I would not be powerless. The surge of power that coursed through me was intoxicating. A strange blend of sorrow, anger, and the sweet satisfaction of knowledge. Henry had not left me helpless. He had left me a weapon, carefully placed, waiting for the moment I was ready to wield it. A soft beep from the motel room phone pulled me from my reverie. My heart sank slightly, anticipating the voice I least wished to hear. "Mom, where are the keys to the safety deposit box?" Jason asked, his tone feigned calm, as though he had no idea of the storm he had triggered. "The bank says I can't access it." I smiled faintly, a cruel satisfaction warming the corners of my chest. I placed Toby gently on the bed and leaned back in the chair, my voice smooth, controlled, practiced. "I don't know, dear," I said softly, letting the words hang in the air with a deceptive innocence. "Maybe you should ask your father." There was a pause on the other end, a flicker of confusion, irritation, and incredulity that made my lips curl into a small, private victory. The ease with which I delivered the lie surprised even me. It was as though I had been waiting my whole life for this moment, and Henry had quietly trained me, through his foresight and planning, to step fully into the role of a woman who could protect what was hers without fear. Toby nuzzled my arm, sensing the subtle shift in the energy of the room. I reached down to stroke his soft, warm fur, feeling the grounding reassurance of his presence. Every discovery, every secret, every careful step of deception I had learned from the ledgers and the shell company filled me with an unfamiliar strength. The fear that had once kept me small, polite, and forgiving had transformed into something else. Clarity. I could act, I could strategize, and I could reclaim what had been stolen. The road ahead would not be easy. Jason would resist, bristle, and perhaps even lash out. But I was no longer the passive woman who had stood silently while her son betrayed her. I was a woman armed with knowledge, guided by loyalty, and fueled by the love of a husband who had thought of every contingency. For the first time since Henry had passed, I felt something akin to hope. Not the naive hope of wishing for goodness in others, but the steady, unshakable hope of someone who knows they have the tools, the information, and the courage to confront betrayal and emerge victorious. I looked down at Toby, small, devoted, and unwavering, and whispered, "We've got this, little one. We're going to see this through, every step of the way." He blinked at me, tilting his head as if he understood entirely, and in that moment, I knew we were ready to face the challenges ahead together. I returned to the house exactly 1 week later, the weight of my new knowledge tucked deep behind a performance I had rehearsed in the mirror of the motel bathroom. My shoulders slumped, my steps small, hesitant, as though the world had finally crushed what little strength I had left. Grief can be a costume when needed, and I wore it like a weary old coat. When Jason opened the door, I made sure my eyes looked glassy, unfocused, the kind of gaze that invited pity rather than suspicion. I let my voice tremble, letting it crack at the edges. I want to help you organize things before I move into a nursing home. The moment I said nursing home, a spark of relief flickered in Jason's eyes. Beside him, Brenda's perfectly glossed lips curved into a smile she tried and failed to hide. To them, I had returned as free labor wrapped in vulnerability. They didn't hesitate. The door opened wider. "Well, if you really want to help, Mom," Jason said, gently guiding me inside as though he were doing me a favor. "There's a lot to sort out. Dad left a mess." "Oh, I'm sure he did," I murmured softly, though inside a small flame of defiance flickered. They thought I had crawled back broken. They had no idea I had returned with purpose. As soon as Toby trotted through the doorway, his demeanor shifted. His nose twitched rapidly, tail rising like an antenna picking up a frequency only he could sense. Without hesitation, he rushed toward the fireplace. His paws scratched lightly at the bricks, his tail wagging with excited insistence. Brenda shrieked, stumbling backward as though Toby were a rabid wolf instead of a 12-pound bundle of fur. "Get that thing away from the fireplace!" "Jason, I told you I don't want that rat near the decor." "I'm so sorry," I whispered, grabbing Toby gently, letting my hands tremble as though frailty ruled my movements. I kept my posture low, submissive, embarrassed, playing to their expectations. But while I pulled him back, my eyes followed the direction of his nose. That's when I saw it. A brick, just slightly out of place, barely noticeable unless one knew to look. Toby had found it instantly. My heart thudded once, hard, like a warning bell. I swallowed it down, nodding apologetically as I led Toby away. No one noticed the shift in my breathing, the way my fingers curled protectively around his fur. They were too busy basking in their own cruelty, too distracted by their victory. The next afternoon presented the perfect opportunity. Jason had left for work, bragging loudly on the phone about some meeting with potential investors. Brenda floated around the living room in a robe, her hair wrapped in a towel turban, complaining about needing self-care after the stress of pretending to comfort me. When she finally left for her spa appointment, the house grew silent, empty, except for Toby's soft footfalls and my own measured breaths. I knelt by the fireplace, Toby sitting beside me as though standing guard. My hands, no longer trembling, found the loose brick. I wedged my fingers along the edge and pulled. It slid out quietly, leaving behind a small, hidden cavity. Inside, wrapped in wax paper yellowed by age, were two items Henry must have hidden long before sickness claimed him: the original deed to the property, and a secondary will. My breath caught. Not in fear, no, in awe. Henry had always been a planner, careful, methodical, quietly brilliant. But this was foresight threaded with love. It was protection disguised as secrecy. He had known Jason might try something. He had known I might one day stand here, needing exactly what he had buried for me. My fingers trembled, not from weakness, but from the enormity of what I held. The deed alone was enough to dismantle Jason's claim. But the will, that twisted the knife of truth in ways Jason never anticipated. The will he possessed, the one he had shoved into my face before evicting me, was a forgery. Not just flawed, not just suspicious, a complete fabrication Jason himself had created. Henry had anticipated his duplicity and, in an act of almost poetic brilliance, filed the real will in a different county, the county where we owned a tiny vacation plot no one ever paid attention to. That filing confirmed my full control over Toby's Trust LLC, and by extension, the home Jason believed he now ruled. A storm of emotion rose inside me: love for Henry, grief for the man I had lost, fury at the boy I had raised, and a new, unwavering sense of resolve. But I forced myself to stay steady. I wasn't ready to reveal any of this. Not yet. I needed Jason to incriminate himself first. I needed him to sink into the lies he had crafted, to declare them out loud, to bind himself to every falsehood so tightly that he'd never escape their consequences. Only then would the truth cut clean. That night, I walked into the kitchen with a smile small enough to be overlooked, but steady enough to give me strength. "Jason," I said softly, "why don't we have a family dinner? Invite your investors. I want to sign over my remaining assets. It feels right. Before I go." He lit up like a greedy child. His hands clapped once together, the sound echoing in the kitchen. "Yes, that's perfect. God, Mom, I knew you'd come around." He didn't see the way my jaw tightened. He never looked closely enough to notice the details. As I chopped vegetables later that evening, preparing a meal I knew they expected me to cook, I paused. My eyes drifted to the knife block, the gleam of metal reflected back at me, cold, sharp, purposeful. I wasn't going to hurt him, not physically. No knife, no violence, no desperate act of rage would ever touch him from my hands. But I was about to dissect him. Piece by piece, lie by lie, delusion by delusion. With surgical precision. Toby lay at my feet, warm and breathing softly against my ankle, grounding me as the weight of what was coming settled around us both. I touched the handle of the chef's knife, feeling its balance. Imagining not blood, but truth spilling across the room when the time came. And for the first time since Henry had died, I felt steady, centered, unshakably in control. The storm was coming, but this time I would be the one steering it. The house smelled faintly of roasting meat, a comforting aroma that belied the tension I felt in my chest. I had spent hours preparing the meal, carefully arranging the table, ensuring that everything looked ordinary, domestic, even indulgent. I moved through the kitchen with quiet efficiency, placing the roast on the platter, its golden brown surface glistening under the soft chandelier light. Toby settled under the table, his small body pressed against the legs of the chair, gnawing contentedly on a toy that emitted a crunching sound, a tiny echo of normalcy amidst the storm that was about to unfold. Jason had invited his wealthy friends, men and women who looked at me with polite, if faintly curious, smiles. They were unaware of the layers of deceit, the years of manipulation and betrayal that had led to this evening. They had come expecting a simple dinner, perhaps a charming widow graciously conceding her rights to family property, and I allowed them to linger in that comfortable misconception. I was playing my part perfectly, the frail, confused mother, uncertain of her place, seemingly vulnerable, disarmed. "Just sign here, Mom," Jason said, sliding a paper toward me with a casual ease, his tone dripping with arrogance and entitlement. "It just says, you're happy with your allowance." His words were meant to be dismissive, a subtle insult wrapped in a veneer of civility, but I barely flinched. I reached for my reading glasses, placing them on the bridge of my nose as if preparing to examine an unimportant bill, and smiled gently. "Jason," I said, my voice soft, but carrying a calculated weight, before I sign. "Can you explain to these nice gentlemen how you managed to buy this house from Henry for $1? The room fell silent, the soft hum of conversation dying like a candle snuffed too soon. The investors exchanged glances, puzzled, eyebrows knitting together, sensing that the air had shifted, though they could not yet place the cause. Jason's confident smile faltered, and beads of sweat appeared at his hairline. "'Twas a gift, Mom." "Sign it," he insisted, attempting to regain control. His tone slightly sharper than before, betraying the first cracks of fear. I continued, my voice trembling with the perfect combination of feigned confusion and calculated hesitation. "But the date on the deed is from the day your father was in a coma. How did he sign it?" My words lingered in the air, delicate but piercing, like glass edges brushing the skin. The investors whispered quietly among themselves, exchanging wary glances. Jason slammed his hand on the table, a thunderclap of frustration that echoed through the dining room. He signed it before. Stop being senile. I set down my fork slowly, letting my fake frailty dissolve entirely, my voice dropping to a cold, unwavering steel. I'm not senile, Jason. And I'm not signing. Every word carried the weight of years of deception, of observation, of strategy honed by grief and betrayal. I looked directly at him, my gaze unwavering, and felt a strange sense of liberation in the sheer finality of my stance. Jason lunged forward, desperation etched in the tight lines of his face, reaching for the paper as if snatching it would erase the consequences of his misdeeds. But Toby, small and fierce, had been watching intently, sensing the shift in the room. In a sudden motion, he clamped his tiny jaws onto Jason's ankle. The sharp yelp that escaped Jason's lips was both startled and painful, and the room froze. The investors' eyes widened, shock rippling across their composed facades. "Get him off me!" Jason yelled, hopping on one foot, trying to shake Toby free, his face flushed with anger and panic. But Toby held firm, growling low, a sound that reverberated with protective authority. I rose from my chair slowly, placing one hand on Toby's small back, feeling the rhythm of his heartbeat beneath my palm. "Let him go, Toby," I whispered, not as a command, but as a promise. Toby released, stepping back to my side, and Jason stumbled slightly, regaining his balance with flushed cheeks and a narrowed glare. The investors were now fully attentive, whispers breaking the initial stunned silence. They looked between Jason and me, sensing a tension far beyond simple family disagreements. I cleared my throat softly, letting my words carry the measured weight of authority and inevitability. "This ledger," I said, lifting the heavy book I had brought, "contains proof of every dollar you stole from us, Jason, and the forgery of the deed you so desperately hoped would remain hidden." The sound of the pages flipping was sharp in the quiet room, each turn a subtle drumbeat of justice slowly closing in. Jason's jaw tightened. He glanced around at the faces of the investors, eyes darting nervously, a man realizing the walls he had built from lies and manipulation were crumbling. "It doesn't matter," he muttered, almost to himself. "I have the house. Possession is 9/10 of the law. You can't afford a lawyer to fight me." I smiled faintly, a soft, measured smile that did not reach my eyes. My heart was calm, resolute, my body steady with the focus of a woman who had been trained in observation, patience, and the quiet execution of strategy. "You cease to be family," I said, my voice low, carrying the weight of every stolen moment, every lie, every threat against me and Toby. When you tried to throw my dog and me onto the street, you chose your side, and I have chosen mine. The room held its breath. The roast on the table seemed suddenly inconsequential, the polite clinking of silverware now overshadowed by the tension crackling like electricity. Jason's face had gone pale, a mirror of disbelief and fear, and I felt a surge of clarity. This was the moment when the careful, deliberate patience of days spent researching, planning, and preparing was about to bear fruit. I had Toby by my side, Henry's foresight in my hands, and the knowledge that I was no longer powerless. Toby sat alert beneath the table, tail wagging slightly, a tiny but steadfast witness to the unfolding justice. I reached down to scratch his ears, feeling the soft, familiar fur, and whispered, "This is it, little one. Watch and learn what justice looks like." And in that quiet, intimate gesture, I felt the full weight of purpose and determination settle in my chest. I was no longer a widow, no longer a victim. I was a mother, a protector, and a woman poised to reclaim everything that was hers, not with rage, but with precision, patience, and unwavering resolve. The room erupted into chaos like a storm breaking over a fragile village. Jason screamed, a sharp, piercing sound that rattled my nerves, and with a swift, desperate motion, he kicked Toby away. My heart lurched. Toby yelped, but scrambled to his feet, shaking himself off, eyes wide and alert. I could feel my chest tighten, the surge of maternal instinct and protective love mingling with a cold, hard anger I hadn't known I possessed. I stood, my knees stiff and my back straight, summoning every ounce of control. The ledger felt heavy in my hands, a tangible weight of truth and justice, and with deliberate force I slammed it onto the dining table. The impact reverberated through the room, a thundering punctuation to the storm of emotions. "This contains proof of every dollar you stole from us, Jason. And the forgery," I said, my voice steady yet resonant, every word carefully measured, like a gavel striking finality. Jason sneered, his lips curling with disdain even as he rubbed his ankle, the sting of Toby's protest clear in his grimace. "It doesn't matter," he spat, though the confident lilt had faltered slightly. "I have the house. Possession is 9/10 of the law. You can't afford a lawyer to fight me." His arrogance, once so unshakable, began to crack under the weight of evidence and quiet authority in the room. I took a slow, deliberate breath, my hands pressing the edges of the ledger as if drawing strength from it. The investors had gone silent, frozen in disbelief, the room holding its collective breath. They had come expecting a typical evening of polite social maneuvering and perhaps a quick deal, and instead, they were witnessing a confrontation laced with deceit, justice, and long-buried truths. The front door swung open, and the sound cut through the tension like a knife. Every head turned instinctively, and for a moment my chest tightened again, anticipating the arrival of law enforcement. But it was not the police. It was Mr. Sterling, his presence calm and deliberate, his eyes scanning the room with the unwavering focus of a man who knew exactly what had to happen next. "She doesn't need to hire a lawyer," Sterling announced, his voice steady and clear, "because she owns the mortgage on this house through Toby's Trust LLC. The words landed with the weight of inevitability, a quiet thunder that seemed to shake the foundations of the room. I felt my pulse quicken, a mix of relief, empowerment, and vindication coursing through my veins. Sterling's calm authority lent gravity to the revelation, and I realized just how far Henry had thought ahead, leaving a plan that was now finally coming to fruition. The room seemed to tilt slightly, the faces of Jason and his investors pale and frozen. Sterling explained, his voice precise and patient. The LLC didn't just own the property. Henry used his remaining savings to buy the distressed mortgage note on the house itself when Jason tried to refinance it secretly last year. "He anticipated your moves, Jason. Every step you thought was hidden was watched." I looked at Jason, really looked at him, seeing the shock, the fear, the disbelief etched into his features. The boy I had once nurtured, comforted, and forgiven so many times had been exposed, stripped bare by his own greed. "I own your debt, Jason," I said, my voice steady, low but filled with the gravity of years of betrayal. "And I'm calling it in, immediately. The deed is invalid anyway, forged during a coma." His face drained of color, a stark contrast to the crimson flush of earlier arrogance. He turned to his investors, eyes wide, lips trembling as they began hastily packing their briefcases. Some avoided my gaze entirely, discomfort written across every expression, while others glanced at me with an awe-tinged respect, recognizing the quiet power in what had just unfolded. "You can't do this to family," Jason screamed, his voice cracking under the weight of fear and fury. His hands shook as he gestured wildly, almost pleading with the universe to intervene, to undo the evidence, to erase the past he had spent years building. I inhaled slowly, feeling a weight lift from my chest that I hadn't realized I had been carrying for decades. I allowed a small, bitter smile to touch my lips. "You ceased to be family when you tried to throw my dog and me onto the street," I said softly, yet with an unmistakable firmness. The words were simple, but they carried the full measure of my grief, anger, and newfound clarity. Toby pressed against my leg, small and steady, a silent affirmation that loyalty and truth were on my side. For a brief moment, Jason faltered entirely, his defiance crumbling into disbelief. The room was charged with a quiet intensity, the kind that precedes the collapse of carefully constructed lies. I could feel a strange, liberating clarity enveloping me, the calm after the storm, the recognition that the years of silent observation, research, and planning had led to this exact moment. The investors began whispering to one another, a mixture of astonishment and respect in their voices. I realized that justice had a form beyond punishment. It was in the revelation of truth, in the exposure of deceit, and in the reclaiming of one's own power. Every tremor of fear that crossed Jason's face reinforced what I had known all along. The careful orchestration left behind by Henry and reinforced by Sterling had succeeded. I was no longer a passive participant in life's cruelties. I was an actor, a strategist, and a woman claiming her rightful place in the world. Toby nudged my hand with his tiny nose, his quiet presence grounding me. I reached down, feeling the warmth of his small body, and whispered softly, "We did it, little one. We did it together." The simplicity of the gesture, the unspoken bond between us, was a balm to the ache in my chest, a reminder that even in the midst of human betrayal, loyalty and love endure. I stepped back from the table, eyes still on Jason, who now seemed diminished, shrunken by the weight of his own actions. The ledger sat between us, a silent testament to years of deception and the ultimate triumph of truth. I realized in that moment that the hardest part of justice was not the confrontation, nor the revealing of lies, but the quiet, unshakable clarity that came after, the recognition that one could rise above hurt and betrayal, stronger, wiser, and unbroken. Toby barked softly, as if in agreement, and I allowed myself a small, private smile. The house was finally mine, and with it came not only restitution, but the knowledge that I had survived, that I had fought, and that I had reclaimed the dignity and power that had been denied to me for far too long. Jason refused to leave. I could hear the stubborn clatter of the door handle, the faint scrape of furniture as he barricaded himself inside the master bedroom. The sound was infuriating, but also strangely liberating. He had finally revealed the full extent of his arrogance, and now he was trapped, just as I had been in fear and naivety for so many years. The air in the house was thick with tension, a palpable mix of fear, anger, and anticipation, but I refused to let panic take hold. I didn't call the police immediately. Instead, I sank into the familiar embrace of my old armchair in the living room, the one Henry always said had the perfect view of the yard, the fireplace, and the front door. Toby curled up in my lap, his small weight grounding me, his steady breathing a comforting rhythm against the storm of thoughts swirling in my mind. Sterling sat across from me, his posture relaxed but alert, watching me carefully with that knowing look that had both unnerved and reassured me since the beginning of this ordeal. "You're enjoying this," he said, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth, his eyes sharp as he studied me. I looked down at Toby, feeling the warmth of his tiny body and the simplicity of his loyalty. I let a slow breath out and shook my head. "I'm enjoying justice," I corrected him, my voice steady, but carrying a weight that had taken years to cultivate. I spent my life protecting him from consequences, shielding him, forgiving him over and over. I was wrong. The kindest thing I can do is let him fall, and finally, he is. My words hung in the air, quiet but absolute, like the declaration of a verdict long overdue. Toby stirred suddenly, ears perking up, and then he darted toward the basement door with a surprising urgency. He began pawing at it with a high-pitched yelp, his little claws scrabbling across the worn wood. I rose, feeling a mixture of curiosity and apprehension, and followed him down the narrow staircase, the muted creak of the steps a soft accompaniment to the tension building in the air. The basement smelled faintly of damp concrete and old wood, familiar yet foreign in its dim light. Toby nosed around, circling the corner where the rug lay, his body low and tense, tail stiff. He scratched at it insistently, letting out a soft, determined bark, as if urging me to see what he had discovered. I knelt down, brushing my fingers over the edges of the rug, heart pounding with the anticipation of another secret, another layer of betrayal to confront. There, hidden beneath the mundane pattern of the basement rug, was a safe. My pulse quickened as I knelt, running my fingers over the metal, feeling the cold, solid surface, the weight of what might lie inside. I remembered the combination Henry had once mentioned in passing, the one I had tucked away in my mind as a whimsical joke. With a small, steadying breath, I entered the date of Jason's birth, an intimate detail. A cruelly ironic choice, and the tumblers clicked open. Inside were stacks of gambling markers, meticulously arranged, each one a silent accusation. My hands trembled slightly as I ran my fingers over them, the realization sinking in. Jason had taken out loans using my identity, signing my name, putting me in financial jeopardy, and endangering not only our home but my life. I felt a rush of disbelief, anger, and finally, clarity. This wasn't just theft anymore. This was a deliberate, calculated act of malice. He had aimed his recklessness at me, his own mother, trusting that my innate kindness and protective instincts would blind me to his schemes. I sat back against the concrete wall, Toby settling into my lap once more, small and warm and reassuring. The sense of violation, the years of silent endurance, all crystallized into a fierce, controlled resolve. Any remaining guilt I had about the downfall of my son evaporated instantly. He had endangered my life. He had gambled not only with my finances, but with my very existence. My sadness was now tempered with strength, my tears replaced by a quiet, burning determination. Sterling's voice broke the silence, calm and measured as ever. "He's finally out of options," he said softly. "Everything Henry prepared is now in your hands. You can act, or you can wait for him to make a mistake." I looked at Toby, his small, intelligent eyes meeting mine, and I felt a surge of gratitude and love. In that instant, I realized that justice was not merely the reclaiming of money or property, it was the reclamation of safety, dignity, and the right to live without fear in the sanctuary I had built. This was about survival, yes, but also about triumph, about standing unbroken in the face of betrayal. I rose, the safe door still open, and carefully packed the gambling markers into a box, a tangible symbol of Jason's recklessness, now firmly under my control. Every motion, every deliberate placement of the items into my bag was a ritual of reclaiming what had been stolen, not just in material wealth, but in peace of mind. For the first time in decades, I felt unshakably centered, grounded in the knowledge that I was no longer powerless. Toby nudged my hand with his nose, his soft whine a small punctuation to the enormity of the moment. I whispered to him, "We're safe, little one." And it's just the beginning. In that dimly lit basement, surrounded by secrets revealed and truths laid bare, I understood something essential. Protecting a life does not always mean shielding it from consequences. Sometimes, protection means standing firm, confronting betrayal, and allowing justice to unfold naturally. I had been wrong to shelter Jason endlessly. Now, I could act not in anger, but in clarity, in measured, deliberate purpose. I glanced at Sterling, who gave me a small nod of acknowledgement, and I knew that our next steps would not be driven by fear or indecision, but by deliberate, thoughtful reclamation. The house, the assets, the peace that had been denied to me, all of it could finally be restored. And as Toby curled up fully against my chest, a tiny, unwavering guardian, I felt a profound sense of renewal. The siege was not over, but I was no longer afraid. The theft, the threats, the years of quiet suffering, all of it had led me here, to a point of clarity and empowerment I had never imagined. And in that quiet basement, the bonds of loyalty and love reaffirmed, I allowed myself a small, private smile. Jason's reckoning was coming, and this time, there would be no room for excuses. No refuge for lies, only the undeniable weight of truth. The decision to call the authorities weighed heavily on me, a strange mix of relief and dread twisting in my stomach. My hands trembled slightly as I dialed, the sound of the dial tone echoing in the quiet house like a countdown to reckoning. Toby pressed close to my side, his small body a constant reassurance, as though he sensed the gravity of what I was about to do. I gathered all the evidence meticulously organized, each document a testament to the years of betrayal and manipulation I had endured. There was the ledger, each entry a knife of realization in my chest, detailing Jason's embezzlement with careful precision. There was the proof of the forged deed, the shaky ink of his treachery frozen in time, and the stack of gambling markers representing the loans he had taken in my name, the silent threats hidden in plain sight. When the officers arrived, I felt an odd calm settle over me. Toby sat at my feet, his head tilting curiously as the uniformed figures stepped inside, their presence both authoritative and clinical. I guided them through the house, explaining everything I had uncovered. The words tumbled out carefully, measured but laden with emotion. The forgery, the embezzlement, the loans, the threats, every act of my son's treachery laid bare. Sterling stood nearby, his presence grounding me, an unspoken reminder that I was no longer navigating this alone. I watched as they approached Jason, still barricaded in the master bedroom, and I saw the shock in his eyes as the weight of reality began to press against him. He had been the predator for so long, and now the hunters were here to hold him accountable. I felt a pang of sadness. Yes, sadness, even now, for the boy I once cradled in my arms, for the son I had loved unconditionally. But the sadness was tempered by a fierce clarity. Love did not excuse betrayal. The officers moved with precision, knocking firmly, calling his name, and finally forcing the door open. Jason struggled, flailing and screaming, the sound echoing through the house like a bitter symphony of rage and desperation. Toby barked once, low and protective, then quieted, his eyes never leaving me. I stepped back, heart pounding, and watched as Jason was cuffed, his protests mingling with tears and self-pity. "Mom, help me! Don't let them take me!" he cried, his voice breaking, an almost childlike plea that pierced my chest with familiar sorrow. My instincts roared, that ancient, unrelenting motherly instinct that had made me rise before dawn for his breakfasts, stay awake through his illnesses, and forgive again and again. My heart ached for the boy I had known, for the mistakes and misjudgments that might have been corrected with guidance and understanding. I wanted to step forward, to embrace him, to soothe and shield him from the consequences. But then I looked down at Toby. He sat calmly, small paws tucked neatly under him, his eyes steady and unwavering. He did not bark, did not growl, did not react with the frenzied alarm that had once been his default at perceived threats. He simply observed, present and composed, knowing that the danger, the immediate, tangible threat, was no longer there. And in that simple, instinctual clarity, I understood the lesson Sterling had imparted long ago. Act like your dog. A dog does not mourn the predator once it has been removed. A dog does not dwell on past attacks when the threat is gone. It observes, assesses, and moves forward, calm and present in the now. I inhaled slowly, feeling a shiver of understanding pass through me. My son's betrayal, my years of silent suffering, the danger he had posed, all of it had been real, but the moment had passed. I could no longer allow the weight of fear or guilt to bind me. Turned away from the police car as it idled at the curb, its lights muted now in the soft afternoon sun. Toby pressed against my leg as we walked back toward the foyer, the familiar contours of the house welcoming us home in a way that felt both strange and right. The air smelled faintly of dust and old wood, but it was a scent I recognized, a scent that carried the history of my life, my love, and my labor within these walls. Brenda had already fled, her car gone, leaving behind only a faint echo of her presence and the sense that material greed could never overpower dignity, something she had abandoned long ago. I glanced around the foyer, at the polished surfaces and the soft glow of the afternoon lights spilling through the windows. The house was quiet now, silent in the way that a place finally reclaimed from chaos can be. Serene and orderly, a sanctuary restored. I sank into a chair, Toby hopping onto my lap, small paws resting on my arm as he nuzzled against me. I ran my fingers through his fur, feeling the warmth and softness, a grounding reminder of loyalty, of unwavering love, of the simple yet profound bond that had guided me through this dark labyrinth. Tears prickled at the corners of my eyes, but they were not tears of despair, they were tears of release, of recognition that the storm had passed and that I had emerged stronger, wiser, and more whole than I had ever imagined possible. For the first time in years, I could breathe deeply, without hesitation or fear. I looked at Toby, his eyes meeting mine with a quiet understanding that transcended words. He had been my guide, my anchor, my tiny, unwavering confidant through the betrayal, the heartbreak, and the fear. And now, together, we could finally step into a life unburdened by treachery. I allowed myself a small, private smile, the kind that comes when one has endured, survived, and reclaimed a sense of justice that is both personal and profound. Jason's reckoning had begun, and though it had been painful to witness, it was also inevitable. I felt an unfamiliar lightness, a freedom that had been denied to me for far too long. The house, finally silent and wholly mine, felt like the culmination of every small act of courage, every secret uncovered, every moment of resilience that had carried me here. And as I sat there, Toby curled in my lap, I realized that this was not the end. It was a beginning of trust in myself, a reclaiming of my power, and a recognition that loyalty, love, and just as quiet, steady, unyielding could prevail, even against the deepest betrayals. 3 months had passed since the chaos had settled, since the whirlwind of betrayal, fear, and confrontation had concluded. The house, once the scene of so many memories, some tender, some cruel, was no longer mine. I had sold it, finally freeing myself from the shadows of grief and deceit that lingered in every corner. Walking through the rooms one last time before the closing, I felt the weight of 30 years pressing gently on my shoulders, a mixture of sorrow and release. Each wall seemed to hum with echoes of laughter, whispers, and arguments that were no longer mine to carry. And though it pained me to leave the physical embodiment of a life I had built, I knew that clinging to it would only tether me to the past. To the son who had betrayed me, to the husband whose secrets had been both a torment and a gift. I chose a smaller cottage near the Florida coast, a place where the ocean stretched endlessly and the air was tinged with salt and sunlight. The property was modest, manageable, and quiet, a stark contrast to the grand, imposing house I had left behind. But it was mine in a different sense. It belonged to my restored sense of self, to a life I had deliberately reclaimed. The morning I arrived, Toby leapt from the car, sniffing every corner, his tail wagging in contentment. I followed him across the porch, letting the breeze brush against my face, carrying with it the scent of freedom and possibility. This place would be a sanctuary, a canvas for the life I intended to paint anew. The foundation, which I named in honor of Toby's unwavering loyalty, Toby's trust, became my next chapter. A mission that transcended personal revenge or restitution. I devoted myself to helping elderly individuals who had been financially exploited by those they trusted most, offering guidance, legal resources, and emotional support. Each day, I met people whose stories mirrored fragments of my own, whose eyes told of silent suffering, of love misused, of courage hidden beneath the weight of exploitation. And in helping them, I discovered a new rhythm of life, one rooted in purpose, in justice, in reclamation. Mr. Sterling, steadfast as ever, became both advisor and confidant, his presence a quiet testament to redemption. Together, we transformed Henry's vision, his foresight in protecting me, into tangible good, a way to turn tragedy into empowerment. Mornings became my favorite hours. I would sit on the porch with Toby curled in my lap, a warm, faithful weight that reminded me of loyalty, constancy, and the quiet power of presence. The ocean stretched endlessly before us, waves breaking in rhythmic, soothing cadence. I watched the horizon, letting the wind tousle my gray hair, tracing patterns in the lines of my face that spoke of loss, endurance, and growth. I sipped my coffee slowly, appreciating the taste, the warmth, the normalcy of the moment. The world seemed vast and welcoming, a far cry from the claustrophobic tension of the house I had left behind. Some mornings, I reflected on Jason not with hatred, though a residue lingered, a recognition of wounds still tender, but with a clear-eyed understanding of the lessons his betrayal had forced upon me. He had taken from me, yes, but he had also unknowingly catalyzed a transformation I would never have chosen, but had come to embrace. I had discovered a strength I didn't know I possessed, a discernment sharpened by adversity, and a voice that no one could silence. I had been invisible, disregarded, dismissed, and yet now I felt undeniably present, unmistakably powerful in my authenticity. I found joy in simple acts, the ones that had previously seemed mundane, but now held profound significance. Toby and I wandered along the beach, his paws skimming the wet sand, leaving tiny prints behind us that would soon be erased by the tides, reminders of impermanence and renewal. I collected shells, curious stones, fragments of nature's own treasures, marveling at their resilience against the relentless waves. Each piece felt symbolic, delicate, yet enduring, fragile, yet whole. I smiled often, quietly, without the need for witnesses. It was a smile born from survival, from the reclamation of dignity, from a heart learning to trust its own judgment again. Evenings brought a different kind of peace. The cottage glowed with soft lamplight, shadows dancing gently on the walls as Toby lay sprawled on the rug, his breath deep and even. I would write letters to those we had helped through the foundation, notes of encouragement, updates, sometimes just a simple acknowledgement of their courage. I took satisfaction in watching them flourish, reclaim autonomy, and recognize their own worth. It was a rhythm of reciprocity, a chain of care that transformed grief into something lasting and meaningful. I often reflected on the strange twist of fate that had guided me here, the betrayal, the secrets, the hidden documents, and the loyal dog who had led me through it all. Toby had been more than a pet. He had been a guide, a mirror, a teacher. His simple instincts had pointed me to truth. His unwavering presence had anchored me in moments of doubt, and his loyalty had reminded me what true devotion looked like. I stroked his fur, feeling the steady rise and fall of his small chest, and whispered my gratitude in a voice that was more than words. It was recognition of the life we had built together, of the battles fought and won in silence. I had lost a son, yes, and the grief of that loss would always linger in some quiet corner of my heart. But in its place had grown a version of myself I scarcely recognized at first, capable, resilient, assertive, and fiercely alive. The new Kate was not merely a survivor. She was a woman who had confronted deceit, fear, and betrayal, and had emerged with clarity, purpose, and a profound capacity for love that was no longer naive, but discerning, deliberate, and unshakable. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light across the water, I felt a deep sense of completion. I inhaled, the salty breeze filling my lungs, and smiled softly, Toby settling more snugly in my lap. This was the life I had earned, the peace I had fought for, the justice I had quietly enacted. Here, on this small porch by the sea, I was not the invisible widow anymore. I was Kate, a woman reclaimed, empowered, and at peace. And to anyone who has endured betrayal, who has felt unseen or taken advantage of, remember this. The journey may be painful, the nights long and heavy, but there is always a dawn. There is always a beginning, even after the darkest chapters of life. Let your loyalty, your courage, and your love guide you forward. If you've been inspired by Kate's journey, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow more stories of resilience, empowerment, and triumph over adversity.